Owen, thanks for being with us today. For everyone watching, today's got some special sort of stuff going along with it. And it's interesting because it's a podcast, but it's not a usual podcast. And you'll find out why. I'm not going to intro you, Owen. I normally intro my guests, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself today. So ladies and gentlemen, Owen Westwood.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. It's good to be here. And you are right. This is a podcast that I don't think will be a usual one, as there are a couple of topics that we'll be speaking about here, which I think are more of the uncommon ones that not a lot of people have heard of or speak about. And as you can initially hear, I have a speech pattern which is different from a usual person, in the sense that I am a person who has got a speech impediment, and that is a topic that I am keen to speak to you a bit more now too.
Which is cool. I mean, look, we've known each other for a while.
Yep.
And there's a juxtaposition between you and I, which is also something we can talk about in a little bit. And I often tell everyone that's watching the podcast, I've got ADHD. That's my condition. In knowing you and knowing the challenges that you've got, there's some challenges that I've got that when I engage with you, they actually test me. And it's the nature of, I suppose, and I'll throw this over to you. There's a thing that people sometimes do when someone has a speech impediment like yours and they attempt to finish people's sentences.
Yeah.
I'm a guy with ADHD who is cursed with trying to finish people's sentences. I live to interrupt people. As soon as someone starts talking, I start wanting to, get my 2 cents in. So when I converse with you, it's always a really good reminder for me to sit back and let you do your thing. With the challenges that you've got, what are some of the things that you've learnt to do around this?
Yeah, so this goes back to 2013, right? So actually, let's go back a bit further, right? So,
go right back, because what I'm keen to understand is, particularly too, like with ADHD, I didn't know I had ADHD until 4 or 5 months ago.
Yep.
With a speech challenge like yours, it's very obvious early on, right? It's not the sort of thing you can hide.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right, Mike. So I first had found out that I had a stutter at around the age of 5, right? And this was when it started to become a thing that I could tell that I was different to a lot of the people and kids that I interacted with, right? And my parents had saw this too. And it was the kind of thing that at that time, right, because we're going back to the early 90s, right, there wasn't a lot of awareness about this kind of thing. So therefore, the amount of work that we could do on it, when I look back now in hindsight, I don't think there was a lot out there at that point in time, right? Now, what's interesting though with me, Mike, was when I got to the age of 6, right, there was around a year or so that it had gone away entirely, right?
Really?
So, yeah, and the cause for that is extremely unknown. But there was about a year there where I was speaking fine. I wasn't having any kind of speaking issues or challenges. And it was a really interesting thing. And then around a year after that, that's when it had come back, and it, I dare say, had come back worse than what it was. So this was around the age of 6. So when I was in around year 1 or 2, that's when it did start to come back and come back worse, as I said.
And for means of just addressing the condition, do we refer to it as a stutter? Is that deemed because people these days trying to navigate what is okay to address something as, but addressing the challenge as a stutter is cool.
Right. Yeah, that's cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to understand: is it deemed a neurological issue? Or is it a motor issue?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So depends on who you speak to, I think. Right. When I was quite young, and this was before I had done any investigation or research on it, I thought it was a motor thing to do with the actual speaking part itself. the more that I looked into it, and through the speech course that we'll get into shortly, I learned that a lot of it is an emotional and a psychological thing.
Yeah, wow.
Yep. So we'll get into that a bit more as well. This is a segue as well into me and my case from a personal perspective, right? There's two things that I guess I'm keen to address here in terms of the two key challenges that I have in my life, right? One, of course, as we know, is I'm a person who has a stutter, but I'm also a person who was born with cerebral palsy.
Oh, well. Wow.
Yeah. So the whole left-hand side of my body is impacted.
Yep.
And it may seem an interesting time to raise this, but the reason that I am is that in my case, they think that my speech impediment or my stutter is caused by my CP.
Right.
Yeah. And now it is different for every person, but in my case and the appointments I've had and whatnot with my specialists, that's what we think is the case with me, right? That being said, how you work on it and how it is improved per se is the same for a person who hasn't got CP. It's the same kind of tools and techniques that a lot of people who are on this speech course use, and they work quite effectively too. And I'd also like to call out that being this transparent about my cerebral palsy as well, that is a big thing for me because that's something that has taken me a long time to accept, right?
Why is that?
Why? It took me a long time to accept for a few reasons, Mike. The first one is, as a kid, I knew that I was different in that sense, right? Now, I do use that word with caution because we are all different, right? There's not two of us that are the same. But with me...
But I've come to using, non-typical because in my line of condition, you're either neurotypical or you're neurodivergent.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right. Yeah. So why I initially felt like that is that I think, especially as a kid, right, we all want to be accepted, right? We all want to be a person who is liked and accepted by our peers and the people around us. And I had a hard time coming to terms with that fact, that I did have a set of challenges which is different from a typical person. And there was just a strong urge to be like all of the people around me that I saw who could speak extremely well at that time, right? Who I saw who had two hands that had worked the same as each other and things like that. And that was a big insecurity that I had until my mid-20s. And the reason for that is, for the majority of my life, I was aware that I had a weakness of some kind, but it wasn't officially diagnosed as CP until I was around 25.
Yeah, wow.
And there's no one cause or reason for that. I know when I was a younger kid, there was an attempt made to really work out what this was, but for whatever reason, it just hadn't came to be. So I reached a point where I thought, I am tired of not knowing, right? So I did what I had to do to go and see the right specialists, and I learned that it was, in fact, CP. That in itself then, I guess, threw a spanner in the works in some sense, Mike, because this goes back to the insecurity of it. I was then faced with having a label on me, right? If I had gone with just having a weakness, which could be a range of things, to having CP. And back then, when I was at that age and I had just learned exactly what this was, I thought of a person who has CP, and I thought of a person who can't walk, who can't talk, who's in a wheelchair, right? And I was aware that my case was quite a mild case in comparison, but I was also cautious not to allow myself to discount what I have and the kind of challenges that I have too. And that was a hard time to really accept that I was a person who had that, because I definitely wasn't, at that time, I wasn't really comfortable to accept that either. So that was a big thing for me. And we now get to the current day where my self-acceptance is extremely good on both topics. So both with my cerebral palsy and my my stutter as well.
It's inspirational, in fact. I think, is probably the way that you go about dealing with this now. For me, if we talk about the two people that are in this room right now, like, I'm always inspired by the way that you come at this, because it's no longer this thing that is a limitation for you. It's like you're very clearly aware and accepting, and you've built a lot of those coping mechanisms. What are the coping mechanisms that you use to get by on a day-to-day? And actually, before we go, there's a question that I really wanted to ask you. What does it feel like? What does it feel like when like, I know what it feels like to struggle for a word, but that's just because I can't get the word out of the air, right? It's not a physical thing. Is it as if, like, the voice in your head is delivering the words, but the body's not catching up? What is the physical representation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm going to address this in two parts, right? So before I did any kind of speech work or speech improvement, it was a case of I'd be hyper aware of what words or sounds are coming up, and I'd do everything I could in my power to avoid those words and sounds. Right?
Is that because they're the words that
That's right.
trip you up? Okay.
Yes. Yep. So I was aware that okay, I have this word or this sound coming up. I know I'm going to have a hard time. So I would then do anything I can to avoid. But as you can imagine, when you get into an emotional state of avoidance, it then causes things to be worse, because I get extremely anxious.
Yeah.
Extremely anxious. And that was one of the key things back then. Part two of this is, ever since I joined the McGuire Programme, which is the speech improvement course that I'm a part of, I learned to adjust my mindset and approach to my speech entirely. So how I think about it now, Mike, is I don't think about it that I have words and sounds that are coming up. That will be tough. Because if I have that kind of mindset about those words, I'm already going to set up myself to fail, right? So now it is, I now see it, and where I'm on it in my own individual speech journey, I see it as a case of, if I'm well prepared to use my full techniques and tools that I have, I can speak fine. There's not a word or sound that I can't say. If I do encounter a block, and if I do have a bit of turbulence, which is what I call it, I hold myself 100% responsible for that, because I know that I have the power to speak well. It's just a lack of concentration and focus on my part, which is why those words haven't come out right.
That's such a powerful thing to say, man. To be in a situation where it's like, yeah, I've got this condition, but it's all up to me as to how well I manage it, particularly when you're in a situation where, okay, the condition that I've got is actually possibly giving me the anxiety that then stops me being able to deliver the speech. So like, it's all me. I don't know. Like that to me is such a powerful thing.
Yep.
Not something I've ever heard expressed like that before.
Yeah, no, I do really appreciate that. And part of it is, and part of that too, Mike, is when I do have a block and whatnot, you'll quite often hear me pause, take a breath, and say that word again until I'm happy with how it has been said. And even on the time that we've been speaking so far, that's happened a handful of times already. And there's a very good reason for that. And that's because I can either spend the time to try to push through a block, or I can choose to just pause and cancel that word or sound I was about to try to push through, take a breath and say that word with the right tools that it needs to be said with a high level of effectiveness and articulation as well.
But it's not about trying to avoid that word, is it? It's about like you say, stepping away from that word, readying for the word, and then coming back. Like, you're not trying to find something else to say.
Exactly right, Mike. It is about spending the time to really attack that word, because that's one thing that the McGuire Programme does teach us, is that it's a non-avoidance course, right? So we are there to be as far out of our comfort zone as we can be, and if there's a word or sound that we have a hard time with, well, that's good, because we can then spend a lot of time on that sound or that word, because it really does enable us to learn and develop a mindset that there's not too much to be gained from avoidance, but there's a lot to be gained through when you accept a challenge and when you attack things. That is how you do learn. That's how you expand your comfort zone, and that's how essentially what I've learned. That is how I can get on top of this thing, right? Is by just attacking things head on and not allowing it to have control over me, but by me having as much control over it.
It's funny, like that sentence can be extrapolated out to any level of life that you would like, right? Like, that's human nature, is to run from the things that scare us and run from the things that we're not comfortable with, but not to run into the things that we're uncomfortable with. So for anyone listening, that sentence does not just apply to speaking challenges, that applies to life. You know, if there's something that is beating you down or something that you're struggling with, walk into it. Walk into it aggressively, and 9 times out of 10, you'll probably come out of it on the other side not too bad.
Exactly right. And that's one thing that I've learned as well, Mike, which is part of why I'm so happy that I am who I am. And I am a person who has the kind of challenges that I have too, for the sole reason and purpose that I have a really unique opportunity to use my life experience and the challenges that I have to inspire a range of people, because I like to think of it like this. Every person has at least a challenge. I'll try that one again. That everybody has at least one challenge that they are working through. Mine just happens to be one that impacts me every time that I interact with a person, and the experience that I have and the work that I've done to improve my own level of self-acceptance and to work on the things that used to be extremely deflating, used to cause me a lot of negative feelings and whatnot. I've turned that around into a positive, right? And I think there's a lot that can be observed from that, from my experience, that we can apply this approach to a wide range of things, a wide range of challenges. And a lot of people can really improve where they are at now, right, is because it's not about what we can't do or what we haven't got, right? If I spent all my life kicking myself because I can't speak like this or speak like that, if I can't do this task or do that task because of my CP, then I wouldn't have gotten that far, right? It's all about developing a mindset where you convince yourself that you'll do the best that you can and you will win, right? It isn't a case of I hope to or I could or I should, right? It is if I do this, I will get there, right?
It's like the famous words from Master Yoda, do or do not, because there is no try.
Exactly right.
Was it tough as a kid? Was it the sort of thing, kids can be shit, kids can just be out of order. Was it a challenge as a kid?
100%. That was the hardest point in time for me, right? Especially from a speech perspective, but also from a CP perspective as well, right? It was incredibly tough. And I only learnt this a bit more when I was an adult, and especially when I became a father as well. I was a lot more thoughtful and mindful of this too. Is kids obviously don't know what they are doing or saying. They don't understand the impact that they could have when they put down another person. But at that time, that hurt a lot, right? Because if you think about it, right, you take me as a kid who was extremely insecure, but who had a lot to say and a lot that I wanted to do. But to feel like you are trapped because of these conditions that I have, it was a really tough thing to, I guess, go through. It was a tough thing to go through. And it was only when I started to be assertive on it, start to work on it when I was a young adult, did I then learn, well, it wasn't actually about them. It wasn't because of what they said or did that had made it tough as a kid. It's because I lacked the self-acceptance to really accept who I was, right? And I did learn to have a whole heap of forgiveness too for those who had harmed me emotionally in some way, shape or form, right? I learned, it's not their fault that I am who I am, and it's not in my control what they say or do. I can't help that. It's not in my hands. So I just need to really put time and focus into what I can control. And once I had learned that, Mike, that's when things really did start to become clear for me on what I had to do to really improve me.
That's full on.
Yeah,
That's full on, because I was an insecure kid, and again, related to ADHD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a thing that comes from ADHD. But anyone, like you could assume anyone doesn't like you. And my natural retaliation was to distance myself with people by being uninviting. I was bullied as a kid, but I wouldn't say I did my fair share of bullying, but I was mean. And I would try and put distance between me and other people just because I didn't want them to be close, because then you've got to be yourself. It's so inspiring to hear you say things like that, because there are people that get through their entire life and never understand that, right? They never get to the point where it's like, it is actually all about what I choose to do. It's about how I choose to act, how I choose to receive information. But the forgiveness part, man, like how do you get to a point where you can say, yeah, I mean, I like to practice forgiveness, but it's very hard for me. Part of that's probably because I've got some stuff that I've not dealt with properly, but I still think if I was to walk past a kid that was bullying me at school, I'm going to flare up. Like, I don't know. How did you get to that point?
Yeah. So I'll go back to one thing that you just said there, right? You said, well, hey, this could be because there's some things that you have in your life that you haven't yet addressed or...
I got tons.
Or worked on.
Okay.
or worked on. So it could be that, right? It could just be, well, hey, it's not that you can't forgive that person because of what they did. It could be that there's things that you need to work on in your life that would then give you the right kind of tools to be able to do that, right? With me, in terms of how I do it, for me, it was kind of a light bulb moment for me, Mike. It was a case of that once I learnt the power of self-acceptance and being authentic and just me allowing myself to just be me, that's when a light bulb had turned on. And I thought, wow, for so long I was annoyed at the whole world and annoyed at the people who had done me wrong. And I guess I had a mindset of how life sucks and it's not fair, right? And as soon as I learned that, hang on, it's not about that. It's not about them. It's not about what they said or did. And it's all about me and how I choose to really approach it. That is when I had learned there's no point holding things against people because it is out of my control entirely, right? I could spend time to be upset at people about things that they have said or done. But I really learned that I could spend time to do that, but it won't help me because I can't adjust the outcome there because I'm in control of what I do and what I say and how I think, right? And when I came to terms with that, that's when I really, I then learned the power of forgiveness in that sense, and I also learned the power of having a lack of judgment on people too, right? Which again, in this world now, right, is a huge thing. And the most important thing, Mike, talking about forgiveness here, is forgiving myself for how I treated myself as well. Which, to be fair, is quite an emotional thing to speak about too, right? Is that I can forgive other people all day long, but when I forgave myself for how I spoke to myself and those internal thoughts that I had, that is when I felt extremely free, man. So that was it, right?
That's so good. I feel like this is a bit of a therapy session for me, man. So I'm getting a bunch out of this. Yeah. Given how far you've come on this journey, like you've obviously, you're very empowered now, and it's very clear to see that your drive now is to about bringing that empowerment to other people that have the condition that you've got. You know, what work are you doing to put back into that community?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I said, I've been a part of the McGuire Programme now for 10 years, just over. And I've been a coach on there too for the last 3-4 years or so. And that puts me in a role where I can help, I guess, a lot of first-timers who are coming onto the course for their first time. And I can be a presence there to assist them and help to guide them as well. And more importantly, it also gives me an opportunity to work more on my own speech too, right? Is that when I'm in a coaching position, it highlights to me, okay, well, there's a lot more work that I need to do as well, because I guess to help to encourage others, I need to be encouraging myself as well and doing the work that I'm advising them to do too, right? So that was a big part of it. And I just want to quickly use this as a moment to say, even in our chat now, if you were to ask me now, how happy am I with my speech now?
I'm going to. How happy are you with your speech now?
That's good. Right now, I am okay about it because part of, I guess, what I do and how I approach my own speech is I am keeping a careful eye out on what I'm doing well and what I'm doing not so well, right? So in our chat that we've had now, I think that I've been speaking a bit too fast. My level of eye contact hasn't been what I like. And those are a couple of the points of improvement that I can see. But I think I like to really relate things back to when I hadn't done work on my own speech. Could I have done this kind of thing now? Of course not, right?
No.
So there's a whole lot of self-reflection that goes into this too. And for those reasons, I am happy with my speech overall, but it's just a really key part of it that I need to be sure to be on the ball and to work out where I can still improve on, because there's no fix or a cure, right? This is a constant ongoing thing for me.
We interact a lot, in our in our industry. So Owen works for a customer of ours, a very close customer, and previously worked for another close customer. So we've had a lot of time together, and it resonated with me when we were talking about doing this podcast the other day. And you mentioned that there are good days and bad. And I can tell that now because of the amount of time that we've spent together. And today feels like a relatively good day. Like you seem to be all over it today. Are there triggers or things that will alert you to some days being worse than others? Is that cyclic or is it random?
Yeah, that's a good question. So usually it comes down to my emotions and how I am feeling, right? And that's one thing that I have learned as well, is that it's not to do with the actual act of speaking. It is more to do with the fact of, if my emotions are all out of whack, there's a likely chance that I won't have as much of a successful speech day as I could if I was grounded in my emotions too, right? I'm going to try that again. Than if I was grounded in my emotions too, right? So if it's a day where I am feeling on top of things emotionally, that's a day that usually I'll do well. If my emotions are out of whack, that's when I think things will be a bit harder. And in addition to that, it comes down to what's the level of practice that I've done in that day too, right? So there's a lot of work that goes into this, right? When I speak with my full technique, it's all about me going to pause, to take a pause, take a breath, and then speak when I am ready to speak. If I don't work on that tool enough, all those tools enough, that's when I can have a hard time too, right? So it does come down to those couple of things. How much time have I spent to work on my speech that day, and how am I feeling emotionally too?
Because then you'd need to, to your point before, you'd need to be taking good emotional care of yourself over a long period of time in order to maintain that momentum. So, all praise to you, having to, monitor the medical state and the physical state, and then, drop in on your tools. One of the things that I think I've noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the tools that I see you using in conversation particularly is when you finish a sentence and you're wanting to alert the audience that the sentence is finished, do you say thank you? Is that the way you hand that? I notice that sometimes it's very clear when you're indicating to someone, I've now finished this part of what I'm saying, so that they're not confusing that with a block, for instance. Is that one of the coping mechanisms?
That is actually a good question. That isn't something that I've done on purpose, actually. But if I was to think about that now, I would say that would be a subconscious attempt just to be articulate when I'm speaking, to advise the person or people that I'm speaking with that I am done. So I think that you are right there, but that isn't a thing that I've done on purpose.
Okay.
But I do think that if I was to reflect on that now, it is a way that I would be assertive with, I guess, the things that I am saying, and to advise people that I am done. All part, I guess, of just me attempting to be as articulate as I can be too.
Well, that's what I've always picked up on. I've picked up on that, and that thank you as being the, and what I've had to say, it's, I equate it back to the old CB radio days of over, over.
Yeah.
It's like a similar sort of thing, but it works well. And it's what I, focus on to make sure that we're conversing in the way that's comfortable. What is there still left to do?
In terms of my speech, there's still a lot left. As I said, it's a really ongoing thing, right? There won't be a day that will come that I'll be quote unquote fixed, right? It is a case of keeping up the hard work and having to maintain a level of commitment to myself and my own speech as well. And I am well aware now, Mike, that if I want to be the best that I can be, then I need to stay on top of this as best I can too. Because if I allow this to go back to how things were, right, and I do not do all of the work and things that I do now on a daily basis to I guess speak how I can speak these days, things would regress and go back to being in a way that I don't think I'd be too happy with, right? And then in addition to that, I think once I became a father as well, that had given me a boost as well of, okay, it now isn't just me that I need to, I guess, do this for. It is now a case of I have 2 kids, and what kind of a role model do I want to be for them, right? I want them to see my highs and lows, because that is part of life. That's one thing that they'll experience too. But it's also a case of I want them to see their dad as a person who does not shy away from adversity or a challenge, right? And so when I'm having a tough day, I just think of that. I just think of, okay, what kind of role model am I right now? Yeah, and that just helps me out in addition to, I guess, the things that I tell myself as to why I need to work hard on this. They just give me a lot more inspiration as well.
Do you notice that if you're not in the habit of, using your tools and practicing, and does that creep up on you? Does that become something where the condition will worsen over time if you're not? It's like exercising, right? If you stop exercising, then you lose the fitness.
That is exactly right. So we approach it with a sports mentality, right? It's just like a sport. If you don't do the work and practice, you can't be good, right? So it is exactly that, Mike. It is a case of having to really attack this thing with a sports-like mentality of, here's how much work I need to put into this to be able to do well and to win. And when I say win, it is to win against ourselves, I guess, right? Is to win against this thing that is our speech challenge that we have, and make sure that we control it, as I said, compared to it having control on top of us.
Amazing. Because I extend that to, so I also compete Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's a very, thing that's driven by, we have a saying in Jiu-Jitsu, which is, my opponent is my teacher, my enemy is my ego. And so that's one of those things where it's the consistent approach of, you're not in this to compete against all these other people. You're only competing against yourself.
Yep.
And if you can embrace the weaknesses that you've got, then all of a sudden, you are beating something. You're starting to overcome those challenges. Being on a podcast is probably something that, is one of those hurdles that, that you've crossed. What other things do you feel like you want to do? Like, is there, I want to get up and speak in front of a few hundred people one day, doing that live? Are these sort of the other things? Like, have you ever thought about doing like a TED Talk or something?
You've just said exactly what I was
there
about
you go.
to say, Mike, is a TED Talk is an end goal for me. So in terms of my past exposures, I guess I've had had countless times that I've spoken to a large audience of people. The largest I'd say is probably 300 people-ish, about that. And I've done a lot of public speaking to the point where that's not a thing that is as far out of its comfort zone as it once was. So I am now at a phase of trying to find a larger thing, a bigger type of challenge. And a TED Talk for me is one of those things of, okay, well, that is one of the things that I want to do next, right? Haven't looked too much into it yet in terms of how to get there, but it is on
I know someone.
my radar. So
Yeah, I know someone I can introduce you to.
nice.
And she runs a lot of the like the TEDx stuff, so the smaller sort of ones.
Yep.
But yeah, we'll get that happening for sure. Inclusivity and acceptance has also been something that we've spoken about through the topic today. And you know, the nature of the enterprises in which you've worked, and particularly the place that you work in. Owen works at RMIT, one of the biggest universities in the country, but also one of the most inclusive universities in the country. And how important has that been to you?
Yeah, it's been important to me from the perspective of that it's good to be around people who are really accepting, right? And for me, where I'm at now in my own personal journey, it wouldn't impact me too much if I was around a lot of people who accepted me or not, because I accept me, right? And that's all that I care about, right? But it is extremely good to be around a wide range of different people. And as you said, there is such a point of emphasis there on being inclusive, inclusive, right? And on making sure that we all are mindful and caring for those people around us. And that's the approach that I take to everyone who I speak with. And I think ultimately, Mike, it comes down to we don't know what a person is dealing with, right? And so that's why having the approach of being inclusive is more important now than it has been, because we don't know what a person is going through. We don't know what a person is dealing with. So it's so important to be as mindful of that as we can be, because, again, it goes back to having a lack of judgment on people, is that we just do not know what kind of day a person is currently having. And so why would I do anything that would potentially impact their day in a negative way? And I can tell you the kinds of people who would do that, Mike. It's the kinds of people who are insecure in themselves, right? And because I've reached a point where I'm accepting of who I am, I don't have any urge or need to do that. And I think the more that we can spread that, I think that'll help to spread that to a lot of people who currently would gain a lot out of that too.
Well, and it's 100% true, because that was my young years as a teenager, and definitely like high school was. Let me paint a picture. So again, ADHD does this thing where you feel like you're never good enough. Your self-talk is always bad. You always think that, that no one likes you. And so what you do is you start to not like other people first so that they can't not like you. And then you distance yourself from people, and you end up being in this situation where you're friends with like many, many groups of people, because what you do is you do this thing called masking, where I'm never myself, but I'm this Mike for this group of people, and I'm this Mike for this group of people. And that went on through most of my 20s, particularly in my work career. I've got to be like this to impress. I've got to be like this. And that really changed for me in my mid to late 30s. I had some some tough events go on in my family, and the loss of some loved ones. And it was just a time to wake up and reassess a lot of that stuff. But even now I find when we talk about having to practice the tools every day, I'm always doing this thing now where I'm like, am I doing this because I'm expecting some sort of positive feedback? Am I expecting someone to congratulate me? Am I expecting more money for something? What is my expectation? And too often my expectation has always been about what's external coming in. It's never really been that connection. So you've done wonders in sort of solidifying the importance of that. Gives me some stuff to go away and work on for sure. But it's just so empowering, man, to hear someone with a condition that you've got that's been through what you've been through saying it so obviously, where people that have never had a challenge like that, they wouldn't know. Like they just wouldn't know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And look, it is a case of that it's not because I am special or I have a tool that not a lot of people have. I'm just a normal guy, man, who had woke up on one day in my early 20s and thought, I'm going to make a choice not to live like this for the rest of my life. I need to do something to really work on me. And that's a choice I made, and I haven't looked back since. And it's extremely cool. You do gain a lot of self-love as well, man. You do gain a lot of different perspectives as well that I hadn't once had. I mean, you had touched on one then of you said when you were a younger kid, you used to not want to be close with a lot of people, in part because you weren't sure how close they would want to be
correct
around you. And if you think about that for a moment here, right, that is a fear of judgment, right? Mm-hmm. So by you having a fear of judgment, what is it that you have done? You have put a judgment on those people because you have judged them by saying they are going to judge me, when we just do not know that, right? We can't know what a person is thinking. And that's one of the key things that I learned as well, especially with my own speech, Mike, was when I would be afraid to speak to a person because I felt, they'll say this or they'll do that. I was taught that, well, I don't know that they are going to do that. And by having that thought, I'm putting a judgment on a person that I don't know. Mm-hmm. And how is that okay for me to do, right?
It's the dictionary definition of prejudice, right? Because it's the judgment that happens pre finding out what's actually going on.
Yep. So that was another large lesson that I was taught, which has been extremely helpful too.
Dude, I think we are sort of done. I just can't thank you enough. And really, I'm going to make this about me for a second, because I'll wind it back 20 or 30 years. And if we went to school together, I probably would have given you a hard time. I probably would have never got to know you. I probably would have put all the prejudice in that we've just spoken about, and I would have missed out on an opportunity like this. So if there's one thing I've learnt in today's session, it is, stop making assumptions about what people are going to do, say, or think, and just put yourself out there, right?
Yeah, exactly right, Mike. And I think the one last thing as well is that, as I said, we all have a challenge that we are working on, or that we have. And my advice to anyone who is experiencing a hardship or a challenge is just to go and do that thing that gives you a high level of fear, right? It is the whole concept of you allow yourself to feel the fear, but you do it anyway. Anyway. And that's such a powerful thing. That's what I have used, which has helped out me. And that's where we can expand ourselves as people. And I guess to be the best version of ourselves, has to be done outside of comfort zone.
100%. For anyone that's listening that may be facing similar challenges, is it the McGuire Programme?
It is, yes.
Yep. So we'll put links for the McGuire Programme in the comments below. And Owen, I can't thank you enough. We've been talking about this for a while, and it's just been so good. We'll definitely do this again.
Yeah, that sounds good, Mike. And thanks for having me here too. This has been a great experience. And again, this is another thing that I have done outside of my comfort zone, which has helped me, and I hope in turn that I can help out another person who hears this too, and I guess wants to make a change in their lives too.
Well, congratulations, buddy. And there's been a couple of things in this that have helped me out, so you've done well there.
Thanks, Mike.
We'll do it again soon.
Yeah,
thanks, Owen.
Thanks. Ta.